Hello and welcome to the Mastermind, Body, and Spirit Show. I'm your host, Matt Belair. As you know, we are facing extreme censorship alongside many other truth seekers out there. If you want to support the show, please go over to mattbelair.com and sign up for the email list. Join the Academy for exclusive and censorship-free content, become a patron, and most importantly, consider doing 3 kind acts today wherever you are in the world. Now let's get into today's show. Our guest today is a mental health advocate who has been exploring the mind and brain for years. He is a CEO and co-founder of Myndlift, a neurofeedback training platform. Welcome to the show, Aziz Kaddan.
Hey, Matt. Thanks for having me.
I forgot to ask you, and I hate when I do that. Did I pronounce your name correctly?
You pronounce it perfectly. Don't worry about it. I mean, if you really want to go, master level with that, then you would say Aziz Kaddan. But that's just, don't worry about it.
We always try to get to the master level, and that sounds so nice. You know, the accents of the world, I think the, Canadian, North American English accent is maybe the most plain. So it always sounds fancier. So I appreciate that pronunciation. Well, it's great to have you on the show. You're doing some interesting work. Why don't you just start us off with a little bit about your background and what you got, doing meditation, brain work. The field of neurofeedback is very fascinating. It's making meditation and mindfulness a lot more accessible to people and interesting because we don't, a lot of people say they don't know what they're doing, but with the neurofeedback, it takes the guesswork out. So why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Exactly. Yeah. Awesome. Well, I'll tell you, I'll give you the rundown of my story and why did I even get into this. So it starts like this. My background is in computer science. I started my degree in computer science when I was at a fairly young age, when I was 16. And then while I was doing my computer science along with high school, so I'd go to high school every day and then go to the university to kind of also work on my degree. And so while I was doing that, I was being sent to conferences in the field of neuroscience by no one else but my father. So he's a neurologist that, just didn't have the time to go to these conferences. So he would send me out there, tell me, just go and take some notes, learn, and then transfer that knowledge to me. I don't have the energy to go to these conferences. And so I would do that, right? I would go to these conferences full of doctors and neuroscientists, and I'm just a kid running around between them. And that got me super interested and super into the neuroscience field. Now, when I completed my degree in computer science, which was a year after I finished high school, I had the ability to go into the technology world early on. So I started working as an engineer in an Israeli tech company. And I still went to these conferences that my dad sent me to. But during this time, I also started getting interested in what's around me, okay? And what was around me was 2 of my siblings that were diagnosed with ADHD. And the one who diagnosed them again is my father. And I asked him, hey, why are they taking these medications? I mean, they have side effects. These side effects are, not great for anyone. Although they are able to achieve what they want in terms of scores in school, but the side effects like headaches, like sleep, loss of appetite, it's not ideal. He told me, look, there are alternative methods out there, but they're just not accessible. They're not affordable. And one of them that he directed me to is called EEG biofeedback or neurofeedback. It is a type of brain training that directly measures the brain activity from the brain using EEG sensors and translates that into visual and auditory feedback on a screen. Now, while the user is seeing that feedback on the screen, they're simultaneously training specific areas in the brain, which can be used for improved focus, or improved relaxation and other use cases, which I will explain more about later on. So essentially, I started looking into this field, and I found out that with all of the technological advances, this field has not been disrupted. It still operates, only in a few clinics around the world, not many, and the equipment is very outdated. You needed to go to the clinic 20 to 40 times throughout the year, put in these EEG electrodes in the clinic and start, doing the training while the clinician is sitting next to you. So it's not very, not very modern. Let's put it that way. And that kind of got me into the field of combining both brain and technology. So brain technology or neurotechnology, and to create this company, which I'm part of right now, called Myndlift. I would explain a little bit more about Myndlift in a second, but I'm sure you have questions. But essentially, Myndlift actually brought neurofeedback from something that can only be done in the clinic to something that can be done from anywhere. And that's our vision, and that's really how we started.
That's amazing. Yeah, I've had Ariel Garten on. She's a co-founder of Muse, as well as Chris Amony. And the field of neuroscience I find very exciting, just because it makes what you're trying to do more accessible and visual. And like you said, auditory, like it gives you a frame of reference. Like I said, the biggest pushback I get when I tell people, give meditation a try, is that they say they don't know if it's working. And so this really provides an opportunity to not only get the feedback, but also create ways to make the training like fun and interactive. Like if you're going to the gym, you might not know what you're doing, but you pick out some ideal exercises, you're going to start getting the result you want. And I feel like it's pretty similar to the neurofeedback. And yeah, I'd love for you to expand on Myndlift and maybe get into some of the techniques, some of the science, and how you're structuring those programs and what results you're looking for.
Sure. I mean, you mentioned Ariel from Muse. So that's a super important point, because our approach was, let's use existing devices out there like the Muse and focus on building a great software to be used with the Muse and offer the full clinical neurofeedback experience from home, right? So the Muse offers you right now the ability to do meditation and get real-time feedback. We took that and we created a whole platform that is using the Muse, but also puts in the clinical expertise in it directly by working with therapists, and also provides a more kind of customizable experience for the user. I'll explain about that in a second. But essentially, you mentioned also gyms and their connection to neurofeedback. And I think the best way to kind of connect between gyms and neurofeedback is think about it, think about neurofeedback as the mirror in the gym. When you're doing a specific exercise in the gym, you look at the mirror to see if you're doing it right or wrong, and you can see it by the movement, right? Sometimes we catch ourselves just doing a very weird movement, and then we see in the mirror that it actually looks weird, and our back is not, we're not moving our back correctly, and it actually looks bad in the mirror, and this allows us to readjust, right? So we readjust our motor movements based on what we see or the feedback that we're getting from that reflection on the mirror. And what neurofeedback does, it does the same thing, but it basically reflects to you what's happening in your brain with these cues that are either visual or auditory. So when you're trying to get into that focused state or relaxed state, your EEG is being measured when you're doing neurofeedback. So your brain activity is being measured using sensors. And whenever the software detects that while you're doing this activity, you're drifting away or you're losing concentration, then you're alerted. Okay? So you have that mirror in front of you. So you readjust. And by the way, the readjustment should and does happen automatically, subconsciously. Okay, so your brain actually starts to learn how to apply the learnings that are coming as a result of these adjustments. And now, if we want to get into more scientific terms, then this is called operant conditioning, right? And so basically, what happens, if I zoom out a little bit, when you put this EEG on and you start, let's say, playing a game, and this game is controlled directly by the measured brain activity, then what ends up happening is, if you, for example, you're training for focus, the more that you're focused, the faster that, let's say, the game would run. And the less you're focused, the slower it will run, okay? So you're getting positive reinforcement directly in the game based on the activity that is measured in your brain. Whenever you're focused, you're getting that reward. And when you lose that concentration, just that reward just disappears. Okay, and this in itself creates an operant conditioning loop that over time will help your brain be in a more focused state just because of that, these small rewards that you get along the way. This is neurofeedback in a nutshell. A very simple concept, if you think about it. The implementation of it until now has been extremely complex. And that's the issue, right? That's the issue that we wanted to solve. So when we started the company, we mapped out the mental health landscape. We tried to look at, what are the things that are missing. We understood that, the best way to provide neurofeedback was to work with, first of all, to go and work with professionals, with the mental health providers that, live and breathe this, let's say, this knowledge. They have it, right? So go work with them. We've built a whole dashboard for them so that they can customize training protocols for their own patients. And then we've built a consumer grade app so that people can take, the Muse device home along with our app and start training based on the customized protocols that these clinicians have created for them. And this taps into a major issue in the mental health landscape today, which is the lack of access. If you wanted to get, mental care right now, it's hard to find that if you're in a rural area, for example. And that's why 60% of the people that are diagnosed with a mental health issue just don't get the care that they need, right? And so our way for solving that was, being able to offer people the ability to get proper mental health based on proper measurements from the brain, and while getting that clinical supervision being done remotely. Okay, so you can do it all online, but you're not only getting a wearable device that is just a gadget, right? You're getting a wearable device, an app that has training that is customizable for you, and the needed clinical supervision to guide you through your whole training program. It's a big vision, but that's what we've been working on for the last 6 years.
Wow, that sounds amazing, and it also sounds very exciting because I feel like there's a lot of applications, and so for me, my immediate application goes to sports and increased performance. And the reality is, the numbers, especially this year with what's going on in the world of depression, mental health, just I don't know, any category or subcategory of anxiety, stress has got to be going through the roof. So I'm curious if you can go through maybe a couple example programs, some applications, and then like how do you measure those results? Because I see on the website it'll go through the brainwaves and then also into the gamma brainwaves, which I know that there's conflicting science around that, and I'd be curious your views on it. I've been aware of gamma brainwaves for about 5 years. Apologies if you can hear my baby screaming. I don't know how good the microphone is. If you don't give her her Cheerios, she can kind of freak out. But the gamma brainwaves I heard about 5 years ago, and I found it fascinating. And originally people were like, "Oh, this is a bit of a myth." And then more science has come out. I was like, "No, I think it's legit." And I was able to access these interesting states through breath work and other techniques that I could feel different in the body, but I didn't get measured with neurofeedback. So I'm curious if you can kind of touch on some of those topics and what your research would suggest about those.
Sure. So of course, I'll, because the audience, I would assume, is mainly interested in how this is relevant for athletic performance. I'll just mention a few things about the relationship between EEG and basketball shots, for example. So recently, there's been some research on that, and they found that there's I'll give you like an example. One of my colleagues that I know has been doing some research in that area, and he brought basketball players, and these basketball players had the task of shooting the basketball. By the way, I'm not sure shooting basketball is shooting the ball is the right term in English. I'm literally translating here.
Yeah, shoot. Yeah, that works. Yeah, shooting the ball.
Shooting
Yeah.
some hoops or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And they measured their EEG in real time while they were doing it, and they wanted to see if there's they can see a specific pattern between missed shots and good shots. And it's the results are astounding. So they found out actually that there's one tiny thing that is different between these two cases, which is the upper alpha in the occipital area and the upper alpha in the motor area. So what is upper alpha? You know, when you're talking about EEG, you're talking about brainwaves, okay? And actually let's define EEG first. EEG is basically the measure of the current, activity or electrical activity in the brain, right? So you put a sensor on and it measures the electrical activity that is in that area. And then this electrical activity can be decomposed into different segments, okay? Let's call these segments frequencies. You have alpha frequencies, you have beta frequencies, theta frequencies, and each one of these frequencies represents a certain range, right? So alpha frequencies are from 8 to 12 hertz. You mentioned gamma frequencies, it's sometimes even above 40 hertz, okay? So they're very fast. And as you might know, hertz is basically the number of cycles per second. And so a frequency that is 3 to 7 hertz, as you can imagine by the number, it's very slow, okay? You're talking about 3 to 7 circles per second, and that's theta. Okay? And this frequency, for example, you see it amplified, this type of brainwave, you see it amplified when you're in a daydreaming state or a mind-wandering state. Alpha, on the other hand, which is 8 to 12 hertz, it's neither slow, neither fast. You can actually, when you close your eyes, your alpha goes up, okay? Or in a very relaxed, when you're in a very relaxed state, your alpha also goes up. So you can see clear distinction between alpha and relaxation. Clear relation between alpha and relaxation. So now going back to that study, they realized that the upper range in alpha is lower in the occipital area in the brain when people have good shots in basketball. And when the bad shots have usually higher upper alpha amplitudes. And so then they figured basically, and that taps into or connects to other research studies that have been published on this. This shows, or they figured that, okay, they should connect this to how to actually train athletes to get, let's say, a higher percentage of good shots. And it was actually to train the upper alpha in the occipital area, to down train it, okay, just to imitate the real world scenario from when they measured what happens when they try to shoot the good shots, okay? And this is only like a tiny piece of information in a big world surrounding, EEG and neurofeedback and athletic performance. But this is usually the concept. You identify a certain pattern that happens, that is related to something that happens, or a certain action or a certain result, okay? And then you try with neurofeedback to augment the brain to be able to produce that pattern more often. So in the case of attention, for example, usually, if you take a look at the research, the case of attention, usually you have, people that have, let's say, attention difficulties, they have lower beta brain waves, which are responsible more for alertness and attention, and higher theta brain waves that are more kind of like the daydreaming related brain waves. So what you try to do with neurofeedback, you try to push the theta down, or to down train theta and to up train beta. And the way that this down training or up training happens is that while you have the EEG on, you will get positive feedback on the screen only when your theta is below a certain threshold, and at the same time your beta is above a certain threshold. So only when these two criteria are met, you get that positive reinforcement. And so this can happen, every second. This can happen every 2 seconds. This can happen consistently, and this can happen every, I don't know, 30 seconds. It really depends on, the thresholds that have been set for each frequency and how your brain is responding to it. But if you think about it, like if you really take that concept and think about it, it's really operant conditioning. It's like training something. It should remind us of that training that they've done, the Pavlov training with the dogs. Whenever they gave the dogs food, they would ring the bell. Then, of course, they would give the food to the dogs. They would ring the bell, and of course, because of the food is in front of the dogs would go ahead and salivate. And then they did this once, over and over and over and over again. At some point, they stopped giving the dogs the food and only ring the bell, and the dogs would start salivating. Okay, so this is also based on the classic conditioning method. And neurofeedback is similar in a way, where you're conditioning the brain to get to a certain state through the training, so that after a few sessions, usually 20 to 40 sessions, the brain should automatically start getting into that state without the training part.
That's amazing. It makes me really excited because of the reverse engineering aspect of it. When you can identify what brainwaves are most optimal for what you're doing. And so it makes me think of a few things. The first thing I'd like to kind of ask is, when you train a state, let's just say you're training alpha, beta, or theta, whatever the heck you're doing for whatever purpose, once you master that state, are you able to slide into other states, or does it lock you into one? My assumption is that you're able to entrain different states and access them when you need them. And then the other question I had, which is kind of a side note, but what state of brainwaves do you think like some sort of yogi or ascended master would be in throughout the day? Like, I've always been curious if it were possible for me to go around and be completely, quote unquote, enlightened, where I'm just like completely surrender to the universe and I feel happy and I'm optimal. I'm so far away from that. But I'm curious if you've ever studied anyone like that, what you think their brainwaves would be like. Like if we're going around the day in a quote unquote enlightened state, what would that look like on an EEG?
Mm-hmm. Interesting. I think that there have been a few studies that they've done on like where they placed EEG on monks um, in the Far East, and if I'm not mistaken, I need to revisit that. But if I'm not mistaken, it was higher alpha state. And by the way, alpha and SMR. So alpha is like 8 to 12 hertz. SMR is 12 to 15 or 13 hertz to 15.
What's that SMR?
SMR is basically, it's called the sensory motor rhythm.
Hmm.
It's kind of like, it's a brainwave that is in between. It's neither fast or slow, and it's usually in the motor area of the brain, and it represents a relaxed, focused state. Okay, so for athletes also, if you look at the research studies done on neurofeedback and athletic performance or peak performance, it's usually uptraining SMR. It's usually uptraining that specific brain frequency. But yeah, so going back to the subject, I think that while I'm not sure, I think that would be higher alpha. Alpha is really associated with a very relaxed state, right? So you have people that when they close their eyes and they get into a relaxed state, you start seeing their alpha going up, up, up. And some people, even when they open their eyes, their alpha doesn't go down fast enough. And by the way, all these measures that we're talking about can be used as a tool to assess your current brain health. So, and that's one of the things that we did in our developments. We've developed this assessment that allows you to measure your brain activity from different locations, and then based on how, for example, how your alpha brainwave behaves when you close your eyes and how it behaves when you open them back again, you can understand a few things about the person. You can understand what is the current mental state, or at least get an indication, right? So, for example, if I didn't get much sleep last night, and you do that test on me right now, so where you place the EEG on, I close my eyes, my alpha would go up, okay, and then I try to open my eyes again, normally my alpha should go down, like should crash down. But if I'm in a lack of sleep state, it will take some time until my alpha goes down, right? So I'm still kind of like in a drowsy, let's say, state. Even like if I close my eyes for like, let's say, 30 seconds and then try to open them again, okay? And you can see that with EEG. That's the beautiful thing. But if somebody didn't have, let's say, if somebody had a good night's sleep and this pattern of alpha not getting back on track on time still showed, then this can indicate other underlying issues that the clinician can then try to figure out based on the other aspects of assessments that they used for this patient. So imagine, today when you give somebody, if you try to assess the current mental health of someone, you would usually go with these subjective questionnaires. How did you feel about this in the past 2 weeks? Has this happened to you in the past 2 weeks? These kind of questionnaires, the self-reported questionnaires, and that's your currently only available tool to understand what's going on. But if you combine this tool along with objective data coming directly from the brain, like EEG and like the pattern that I just described, you can probably customize the therapy or the training that you're giving to your patient a lot better, right? And make mental health finally something that is data-driven, objective data-driven, right? And that's really the mission. Now you asked me another question, and I totally blacked out on that.
That's all right. That's a wonderful answer. It made me think of a whole bunch of new questions, so I'm going to throw them all at you and see what you see what you can manage. So, I actually even forget the original one because I was kind of following along. So I'm curious about what brainwave are people in if they're stuck in stress? One of the things that I believe to be true, and you can correct this if this has been false, but I feel like people wake up and then they kind of get into this stressed out state. So they're stuck in beta all day and they're never able to drop into alpha, whether it's meditation or theta or something like that. So when they wake up, they believe that life is beta or higher stress. And so because they haven't, maybe in a long time, could be potentially months, but for many people years, they're wake up and they're immediately in beta all day and kind of a bit of a higher stress. And so I feel like moving into these other states alone starts to break that pattern. And then what that allows is the brainwave entrainment to allow us to get familiar with the alpha state, familiar with relaxation. And so if you're working all day and you realize you're stressed, you can just take a few moments and, relax. If the kids are driving you nuts, you're able to kind of relax. But if you're always stuck in beta or high stress, it's going to be harder for you to achieve that. And then I kind of want to throw some other stuff at you, but the like the science on this for like reverse engineering, like have you seen what is some compelling science you've seen to show that this is effective? Because I feel like we now have the technology to make it accessible and to get the feedback, like you said, and it's just not adopted yet. You know what I mean? Like I remember using the Muse and I was like, does this thing work? Like how the hell does this thing even work? Like I got birds chirping in my ear and things like that. But that was like 5 years ago. I think I first put the Muse on. And so we've come a very long way. And I feel like this kind of technology is promising because we can measure the results we're getting and then we can track it. So we can now measure if something's off or, we need to upgrade or improve something.
Yeah. Absolutely. Okay, so this is so many subjects that I can talk about right now. So feel free to stop me anytime if I, go overboard with my time limits.
It's all right, whatever you want. Yeah,
but it's just it's a lot of things to say. Okay, so I'll first of all talk about the technology piece, and what has changed since the first consumer EEG device came to the market. I think just software has gotten much stronger. I mean, EEG sensors are just, they're EEG sensors. They measure the brain activity, and then the let's say the brilliance is what can you do with that brain activity? I mean, it's just random numbers. What can you do with these random numbers? Not random, sorry, but they're just a series of numbers. What can you do with these numbers that might seem random? And that's really what we've been focusing on, and I know other companies that are also doing that. Some companies took that to the area of sleep, by the way. where they would monitor your brain activity during your sleep. And in your first few minutes in bed, they would try to play specific music that will make you fall asleep faster based on the current brain state that you're in, that they can measure from your brain activity. Okay, so some people took it there. Some people like Muse, stuck with meditation, which is great, and they, kept working well in meditation. And companies like us, we said, you know what, let's actually provide people with more data, and also be able to train them. So one of the things that we've been working on is also, while you're doing your neurofeedback training, which, yes, as you said, might seem kind of weird, not weird, but also confusing, because you're putting something on and you're getting feedback. You're not necessarily sure what is that feedback. What are these birds chirping in my ears? But essentially, we try to visualize or quantify your progress by showing you before and after pictures of how your brain looks like brain maps, or look how your alpha has actually changed over time. So you start for the first time ever to measure a parameter or physiological data that we just didn't have access to before. Just like when Fitbit came in and we were suddenly able to measure our heart rate easily, and heart rate variability, and see for example, when we're stressed more, when we actually do more activity, and when we need to do more activity just by wearing that bracelet. So we're trying to do the same thing here, but just understand the brain on a deeper level, which is extremely difficult, but definitely achievable with the current technologies today. Now, I'm gonna talk about the subject of reverse engineering, reverse engineering is it's kind of like an oversimplification, but I'm gonna use this term because it's a nice label. I like it. So one of the more interesting studies that I came across a few years ago, and really opened my eyes, was they put EEG on people during their sleep, and they wanted to understand what happens during a good night sleep. And they saw that at certain stages, when these stages are known for stages in which we actually conserve, not only sleep, but also conserve information that we've learned the past day, you see a specific pattern, which is the theta brainwaves, which are, the lower, kind of like the slower brainwaves between 3 and 7 hertz, start to go up. Okay, they start to go up more than normal. Okay, and then they go down. And so they figured, okay, perhaps theta is actually related to memory consolidation, okay, to consolidating information and memorizing it during sleep. So that was the theory. So they wanted also to see if that was true, can we actually train people to consolidate information, or to have better memory consolidation when they're awake? Okay, so try to imitate that stage, or that sleep state, that state when you're sleeping, but when you're awake. So what they did, and they did this research in a university here in Israel. They brought 2 groups of people, and they taught them a motor skill on a computer that they needed to memorize. Okay, and then one group did a neurofeedback session for 20 minutes that up-trained theta. Okay, that neurofeedback session was focused on bringing that theta brainwave up. Okay, and the other group, what they did was just watch a normal movie. Okay, so something that is super passive, but not up-train their theta. By the way, both groups watched a movie. One group, the movie would change the brightness based on the theta, and the other group just did not. The movie was not connected to EEG or neurofeedback at all. Okay. What they found was that the group that did the neurofeedback managed to conserve the information, or to consolidate the information, and to remember that motor skill 2 days after, so 48 hours after, 1 week after, 2 weeks after, and even if I'm not mistaken, a month to 2 months after. So they actually managed to memorize that information for long term compared to the other group, at a significantly higher rate. Okay, and this is super promising because they basically imitated a state when you're sleeping, but they they train you to get into that state right after learning new information when you're awake. Now, obviously, this is, these are promising results, but there are a few other things that need to be tested. Like, for example, what happens if you continue to train theta and then end up with higher than normal theta, which we know is not it's not a great thing. So you understand. So there are things that need to be tested there, but this at least shows the promising area of looking at EEG patterns and trying to imitate them through training. Another area is a cognitive decline. They found that for people, with aging, the peak alpha for the individual starts to shift left. Now, what does that mean? Okay, I used a lot of terms here. Peak alpha is basically, when you look at the alpha, you're talking about a brainwave between 8 to 12 hertz, right? So peak alpha looks at, okay, between these, in this range of 8 to 12 hertz, where is the strongest amplitude? Like where is it the strongest? Is it at the 9 hertz? Is it at the 7? Is it at the 10 hertz, 11 hertz, 12 hertz? Where is it? Because it looks like a mountain. Think about it like a mountain. So where is the peak? Okay, in that range. And they figured that for people who are young, or for example, athletes, the 20s, 30s, and so on, you would usually find the peak more to the right, so more towards the 11 or 12. So it's very fast. Okay, so they have very fast alpha, and the people that are older, as they start getting older, they saw a correlation between their age, their higher age, and their peak alpha going left, going more towards the 9 or 8 hertz. Okay, and so for people with cognitive decline, they found out that one of the early signs of it is the peak alpha starting to shift early on, before they actually start getting into an old age. So you can start to pick it up at a much younger age, and to see that their alpha is their peak alpha is shifting. Okay, what can you do with that? So although there's not much research about what can be done with that using neurofeedback, if you can actually retrain the peak alpha to shift to the right, but at least if this is an indicator, you can use other preventative tools to prevent cognitive decline and hopefully, save lives, right? And so this is just tip of the iceberg of what's going on right now in the EEG world. Now, I'm gonna take all of what I said right now and kind of like put it in parentheses, because it's important to know that while there's promising research, promising results, we should also be critical of it and look at it in a critical lens. A lot of research in the neurofeedback field was not as rigorous as it should be, and that's basically the main criticism right now against neurofeedback. Some neurofeedback protocols are believed to be sometimes are affected by placebo effect. So although I'm in the neurofeedback field, and of course I'm promoting neurofeedback, I also have to be critical of the research. That's why, like, whatever research I'm mentioning right now, these are the results, but of course it requires more in-depth studies and more, let's say, rigorous retests and structures and protocols. So, and this is, by the way, this applies to a lot of fields, not in neuroscience, not only in neurofeedback. And so what we can know today can, change drastically tomorrow. But yeah, this is just the tip of the iceberg of what's going on in the research world and neurofeedback.
Wow, well, that definitely sounds promising, and I feel like just having the data and the feedback, right? It's a place to start. That's what you need with any type of training to know if it's effective, because otherwise you're experimenting, which is good, but the more data that you can get, then you can refine the way that you train or the processes that you use, because just like anything, it's usually not a one size fits all. You know what I mean? Like meditation in itself is fantastic, but there are many different forms of meditation. Also thinking about what are the challenges that you are facing personally. Maybe you have higher anxiety. Maybe you struggle with stress. And so you want to use meditation or brainwave entrainment or feedback or hypnosis or any other tool to help with one specific thing. And so maybe one technique is going to work better for you. And that's what I like about Myndlift is it seems like that there are different programs in there. So you can kind of test around and then you go out into the real world and you see if you feel different. You know, when I coach people and have everybody has a different goal. And one of the things I like to say is that if you can be whole, happy, harmonious, and full of self-love wherever you are in the process, you're doing amazing. I have not mastered that yet. I am definitely in states of stress throughout the day and anger and frustration. But I work on it and at least it's meaningful. You know, it's like meaningful stress and frustration. But I am always looking for effective tools to help me navigate the day with more peace and more empowerment and more focus and more efficiency. And so I feel like this is really promising in a lot of ways. And I'm curious if you could speak about there's brainwave entrainment, there's kind of biohacking, and there's also the Heart Math Institute. And we've only got about 15 minutes left because I'm sure you're a busy guy. So I'm going to throw those three things at you, and I don't know if one of them is more relevant to you, but I really am excited about Heart Math and what they're doing and just being in states of coherence, also states of empowerment. And, it is linked up to the brain, but it's just the way that we live our life. So whatever that result is in the brain, you know what I mean? How do we integrate that into our body? So we are going around the day more peaceful, more empowered, more focused, more centered, because when we're in those, this is just my guess, makes sense to me, but if we're in more alpha, we learn how to meditate, we learn how to take some space, then we can get into the realms of imagination, possibility, enthusiasm, positivity. And when we're directly focused and we're in higher stress, higher anxiety, whatever those brain waves may be, probably beta, you're not going to get into those states. So you're going to feel more disempowered. You're going to feel like the world is just tugging you and that you have no time and space for imagination and creation. And I think that everybody is capable of creating whatever they want. It's probably going to take longer than they think, but you need to get into that space of what would I create from an empowered space. How do I want to design my life? And I feel like it's those spaces in between that give us the access to that imagination that'll inspire us to start taking that daily action to build our lives deliberately, rather than feel like the world is just tugging us and we have no control and we kind of feel like we're just kind of getting pulled along.
For sure. I mean, these small optimizations, thinking about it, I mean, you mentioned goals, right? I mean, when you set a certain